On Christmas Eve, I was sitting alone in my car with only $4 in my pocket, while my family was celebrating inside without me. I thought that would be the worst night of my life. I had no idea that one knock on my window would change everything forever. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person spending Christmas Eve in a 20-year-old Honda that barely started on cold mornings. If someone had told me that just a month earlier, I would have laughed. Back then, I had a steady warehouse job outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover my tiny apartment, groceries, gas, and the occasional dinner with my younger sister. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling either. I had routines. I had plans. Most importantly, I thought I had family. Then everything unraveled in less than 2 weeks. It started on a Monday morning. The company gathered everyone in the break room. Nobody smiled. The plant manager looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "I wish I had better news," he said. The warehouse was closing. Orders had dropped all year, and the company decided to move operations overseas. Hundreds of us were laid off before lunch. I remember standing in the parking lot afterward, holding a cardboard box with my coffee mug, my work gloves, and a framed picture of my parents from years ago. It felt strangely light. Like everything I'd worked for, fit inside one cheap cardboard box. I spent the next several days sending out resumes. Every warehouse, every hardware store, every grocery chain, every delivery company, anywhere within 50 miles. Nothing. December isn't exactly the easiest time to find work when hundreds of other people just lost their jobs too. My savings disappeared faster than I expected. Rent, electricity, insurance, gas, food. Every payment felt like another piece of solid ground disappearing beneath my feet. I stopped buying coffee. Then I stopped eating breakfast. Soon lunch disappeared too. I'd convinced myself I wasn't hungry. A bottle of water could make your stomach feel full enough if you drank it slowly. By the second week after losing my job, I started selling things. First my television, then my gaming console, my guitar, my old watch that my grandfather gave me. That one hurt. The pawn shop owner looked at it for maybe 10 seconds before offering me $60. I wanted to tell him it was worth more, not because of the brand, because it had been on my grandfather's wrist every day for 30 years. Instead, I just nodded. Need has a way of making memories negotiable. Every item I sold bought me another day, another meal, another tank of gas, another chance to believe tomorrow might be different. It never was. The rejection emails came one after another. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate. We appreciate your interest. We'll keep your application on file." Eventually, I stopped opening them. I already knew what they'd say. The hardest part wasn't being broke. It was pretending everything was okay whenever my family called. My parents had always cared more about appearances than reality. Everything had to look successful, normal, perfect. When I finally admitted I'd lost my job, there was silence. Not concern, not questions, just silence. Then my mother sighed. "You should have planned better." I stared at my phone. Planned? For getting laid off? You always need emergency savings. I had some. Clearly not enough. That conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. When we hung up, I realized she'd never once asked if I'd eaten. Or, if I was okay. A few days later, my landlord taped an overdue notice to my apartment door. I still had a little time before eviction, but not much. The heating bill was overdue too. Some nights, I slept wearing 2 hoodies because I couldn't afford to keep the apartment warm. I told myself it was temporary. I had to believe that. Otherwise, I don't know. Christmas was getting closer. Lights appeared everywhere. Every neighborhood glowed. Children laughed while carrying shopping bags almost bigger than they were. Couples argued over wrapping paper in grocery stores. Radio stations played the same Christmas songs every hour. The whole world looked warm. Except mine. 3 days before Christmas, my sister Emily called. She sounded nervous. "Mom wants me to tell you something." I already knew that wasn't a good sign. "What is it?" There was another pause. "They don't think." Maybe. Emily? She finally blurted it out. They don't want you coming over on Christmas. I honestly thought I'd heard her wrong. What? They said this year should stay positive. I don't understand. They think you'll bring everyone down. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process it. I'm their son. I know. I've spent every Christmas there since I was born. I know. So? What exactly are they saying? Emily's voice cracked. They said they don't want the holiday ruined by all the negativity. Negativity, that was the word. Not unemployment, not struggling, not depression. Negativity, as if losing everything was some bad attitude I could simply turn off. I swallowed hard. What about you? I argued with them. And? They said if I kept defending you, I didn't have to come either. She started crying. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. It's okay. No, it's not. No, it isn't. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment for almost an hour without moving. I wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly the first felt disposable. Like the second I stopped being successful, I stopped being family. Christmas Eve arrived colder than expected. Snow covered the streets in thin white layers that reflected every colorful light hanging from nearby houses. My refrigerator contained half a bottle of ketchup, one slice of old cheese, and nothing else. I counted my money. $4. 4 wrinkled $1 bills. That was everything I had left until, honestly, I didn't know when. I couldn't even bring myself to buy food with it. What if I needed gas? What if my battery died? $4 suddenly felt like the line between surviving and being completely stranded. Around 6 that evening, I packed a blanket into my car. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I couldn't bear sitting there knowing everyone else was with people who loved them. So, I drove. No destination, just roads covered in Christmas lights. Everywhere I looked, families were carrying gifts into warm houses. Kids were running through front yards. Neighbors hugged each other. People laughed. I found myself parked outside a neighborhood where almost every home looked like something from a Christmas movie. Inflatable snowmen. Bright wreaths. Garlands wrapped around porches. Someone had giant wooden reindeer glowing in their yard. For a second, I imagined walking up to one of those houses, knocking, asking if they had any leftovers. The thought embarrassed me enough that I started the car again. Around 7:30, I drove past my parents' neighborhood. I told myself I wouldn't stop. I lied. I parked half a block away. Their house looked beautiful. The lights were brighter than ever. Cars lined the driveway. My aunt, my uncle, my cousins. Everyone was there. Through the front window, I could actually see the dining room. People were laughing. My dad carved a turkey. Emily carried plates into the kitchen. She looked exhausted. My mother smiled while talking to relatives. It was strange. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. I sat there for almost 20 minutes. Nobody knew I was outside. Nobody came looking. Nobody wondered where I was. Eventually, I looked down at myself. Same winter coat, same boots, same person, yet somehow I'd become invisible. I started crying before I even realized it. Not loud, just silent tears rolling down my face. I'd always heard people say, loneliness hurts. I never understood that until that night. It actually felt physical. Like someone had reached into my chest and slowly squeezed. I wiped my eyes before anyone walking by could notice. My phone buzzed. For one stupid second, I thought maybe it was my mom. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done. Instead, it was an automated email. Another rejection. I laughed again. Christmas Eve. Even employers were reminding me I wasn't needed. I turned the phone off. Completely off. I didn't want to hear another sound. The temperature kept dropping. My breath fogged the windshield. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself. Across the street, a little girl opened a present early. I could see her jumping up and down while hugging what looked like a stuffed bear. Her father picked her up and spun her around. She laughed so hard, I could hear it through my closed windows. For a moment, I remembered being that little. Back when Christmas meant waking up excited. Back before adulthood turned every holiday into a reminder of what you hadn't accomplished. I wondered if that little girl would ever know what it felt like to be unwanted. I hoped she never would. Hours passed. I watched families arrive, leave, wave goodbye, hug each other. Meanwhile, I debated whether to spend one of my $4 on a burger from a dollar menu. I decided against it. Hunger felt easier than fear. Around 9:30, snow began falling harder. The streets grew quieter. Most people were finally inside. I leaned my seat back and stared at the roof of my car. Maybe tomorrow would somehow be different. Maybe I'd wake up and find an email offering me a job. Maybe my parents would call. Maybe. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. Nobody should have been standing beside my car. Slowly, I turned my head. An elderly woman stood outside my driver's side window. She wore a thick red winter coat covered in snowflakes, knitted mittens, and a green scarf wrapped twice around her neck. She smiled gently. Not the fake smile people use when they pity someone. A real one. I rolled the window down just a few inches. "I'm sorry," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" Instead of answering immediately, she looked at the empty passenger seat. Then back at me. "You look like someone who's waiting for a miracle," she said softly. I didn't know what to say. She continued. "I could use another pair of hands tonight." I frowned. "For what?" She smiled again. "To help me deliver Christmas dinners to people who would otherwise spend tonight completely alone." I stared at her. Every instinct told me not to trust strangers, especially on Christmas Eve. Maybe she noticed the hesitation on my face, because she leaned down slightly and added one quiet sentence. "I promise, you'll receive far more than you'll be giving." I looked at her, then at the snow falling outside, and hesitated. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Snowflakes drifted between us, landing on the edge of my cracked window before melting into tiny drops. "I don't even know you," I finally said. "That's true," she replied with a warm smile. "My name is Margaret." "I'm Daniel." "It's nice to meet you, Daniel." There was something about the way she said my name. No judgment, no pity, just simple kindness. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I don't think I'm really in the mood." "I know." She didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me. Instead, she looked down the quiet street where colorful Christmas lights reflected off the snow. "That's exactly why I came over." I frowned. "You've been sitting here for a long time," she said gently. "I was unloading food from the church van across the street. I noticed you when I arrived." I hadn't even seen the small white van parked a few houses away. "I wasn't spying," she added with a little laugh. "I just recognized loneliness." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Recognized loneliness. As if it had a face. As if she'd seen it before. "I lost my husband 12 years ago," she continued. "Our first Christmas without him. I sat in my car for nearly 3 hours because I couldn't bear going inside my own house." I looked at her. She wasn't comparing our pain. She was simply telling me she understood. "I don't have anything to give," I admitted quietly. Margaret smiled. "I'm not asking you to give money." She held up 2 insulated food bags. "I'm asking you to carry these." I looked down at the 4 $1 bills sitting in my cup holder, then back at her. Maybe I had nowhere else to be. Maybe I simply didn't want to spend another hour staring through someone else's window. I took a slow breath. "Okay." Her smile somehow became even brighter. "Good." She stepped back while I climbed out of my car. The freezing air hit my face immediately. For the first time all evening, I wasn't sitting still. We walked over to the church van. Several volunteers were loading containers filled with turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, vegetables, pie, and little Christmas cards that children from the church had colored by hand. One volunteer handed me a red Santa hat. "You'll need this." I laughed. I don't really look like Santa. No. He grinned. But you look like someone who's about to make somebody's night. Those words stayed with me. Margaret handed me a list. We have 8 stops tonight. 8? Some people can't travel. Family? She nodded sadly. Some have none. Our first stop was a small apartment building downtown. The hallway smelled like old carpet and radiator heat. Margaret knocked softly. After a few moments, the door opened. An elderly man stood there using a walker. His apartment was barely larger than my living room. "Merry Christmas, Walter," Margaret said. His entire face lit up. "You came. I told you I would." He looked at me. "Who's your friend?" "This is Daniel." Walter reached out his trembling hand. "Merry Christmas." His grip was surprisingly firm. Inside, I noticed only one chair, one plate, and one tiny artificial Christmas tree, sitting on a table no taller than my knee. "I wasn't expecting company," Walter said. "You've got some now," Margaret answered. He laughed. "I spent 38 Christmases with my wife." He looked toward an old photograph hanging on the wall. "This is the 5th one, without her." His smile never disappeared. "You'd think it'd get easier." It didn't. You could hear that much. He thanked us for the meal over and over again. Not because of the food, because someone remembered he existed. Back in the van, I stared out the window. "I thought I was lonely," I whispered. Margaret kept driving. "Pain isn't a competition, Daniel." "No, it isn't. But sometimes, seeing someone else's burden helps us carry our own." Our second stop was a tiny house on the edge of town. A woman answered, holding a little boy who couldn't have been older than 6. He wore superhero pajamas. His smile was missing 2 front teeth. "Merry Christmas!" he shouted before we'd even spoken. His mother looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Margaret laughed. She handed over the meals. The little boy looked at me. "Are you Santa's helper?" I glanced at my ridiculous red hat. "I guess I am." "I knew it!" he whispered loudly to his mother. "See? I told you Santa sends helpers." His mother looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. After the boy ran toward the kitchen, she quietly thanked us. "My husband passed away in October." The words almost stole the air from my lungs. "I'm still figuring everything out." She blinked back tears. "I couldn't afford Christmas dinner." Margaret hugged her without saying a word. Sometimes silence says everything. As we walked back outside, I noticed the little boy waving through the window. Still smiling. Still believing. I thought about the burger I'd almost bought with one of my last dollars. That child would have gladly traded every toy in the world just to have one more Christmas with his dad. Perspective is a strange thing. It doesn't erase your pain. It simply reminds you that suffering wears many faces. The third stop changed me forever. Margaret parked outside a rehabilitation center. Inside lived veterans with permanent injuries. One man named Frank had lost both legs years earlier. His room was decorated with military photographs and tiny American flags. He greeted us with the biggest grin I'd seen all night. "Merry Christmas!" His voice practically filled the room. "You folks hungry?" he joked. Margaret laughed. "We're bringing food to you." "I know. I just like asking." Frank told stories for nearly 20 minutes. About his army buddies, about terrible coffee overseas, about proposing to his wife in a parking lot because he couldn't afford a restaurant. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier, yet somehow, he spent most of the conversation making us laugh. As we left, I asked him quietly, "How do you stay so positive?" He looked at me thoughtfully. "I already lost enough." "What do you mean?" "I'm not giving sadness permission to steal the rest." I repeated that sentence in my head, the entire elevator ride down. I wasn't giving sadness permission to steal the rest. The rest of the evening blurred into one unforgettable journey. An elderly couple living in a motel after losing their home. A retired school teacher with no surviving relatives. A blind woman who cried because someone remembered her favorite pumpkin pie. A former firefighter recovering from cancer who insisted we take cookies he'd baked himself. Every door opened another story. Every story reminded me that invisible battles exist inside ordinary homes. And despite everything they'd endured, nearly every person smiled. Nearly every person thanked us. Nearly every person wished us a Merry Christmas. Around midnight, we finally returned to the church parking lot. I realized something strange. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about myself. Margaret poured 2 cups of hot chocolate from a large thermos. She handed one to me. "You did well tonight." "I don't think I did much." "You showed up." She smiled. "That matters more than you know." We stood quietly while snow continued falling. Finally she asked, "What happened?" So I told her. Everything. The layoff. Selling my belongings. Skipping meals. Watching my family celebrate without me. Being told not to come because I'd ruin Christmas. I expected sympathy. Instead, Margaret listened. Really listened. When I finished, she rested her hands around the warm cup. "My late husband owned a small construction supply company." I nodded. "Our friend Thomas runs it now." She looked over at me. "They're expanding after New Year's." I blinked. "They've been trying to hire someone dependable." "I've applied everywhere." "Not there." She smiled. "I can't promise anything." She reached into her purse and wrote a phone number on the back of one of the children's Christmas cards. "But I can promise he'll answer if I tell him to expect your call." I stared at the card. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll call him." "I will." "And promise me something else." "What?" "When your life gets better." She paused. "Remember tonight." "I don't think I could ever forget tonight." She smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Before leaving, she quietly slipped something into my coat pocket. I didn't notice until I reached my car. It was an envelope. Inside was a grocery store gift card. No note. No amount written anywhere. Just a small handwritten message. "Everyone needs help sometimes. Margaret." I cried harder than I had all month. Not because of the gift card. Because someone who owed me absolutely nothing had treated me with more compassion in one evening than my own family had in weeks. The day after Christmas I bought groceries. Real groceries. Bread, eggs, soup, milk, fresh fruit. It felt like winning the lottery. 2 days later, I called Thomas. Margaret had already spoken to him. He invited me in for an interview. It wasn't anything fancy. Mostly we talked. About work. About reliability. About life. At the end, he smiled. "Margaret says if she trusts someone, I should too." I started the first week of January. The paycheck wasn't huge. I didn't care. It was enough. Enough to catch up on rent. Enough to stop selling pieces of my life. Enough to breathe again. Months passed. I worked hard, showed up early, stayed late when needed. Thomas noticed. By summer, he'd promoted me to warehouse supervisor. For the first time since losing everything, hope no longer felt imaginary. One Saturday afternoon in August, my phone rang. "Mom." I stared at the screen, then answered. "Hi, sweetheart." Sweetheart. I hadn't heard that word in months. "We've been thinking." She hesitated. "We haven't seen you much." I almost laughed. "You told me not to come." Silence. "We made mistakes." Dad got on the phone. "We'd like to have dinner together." Emily had apparently spent months reminding them what they'd done. Maybe guilt finally caught up. Maybe they realized success isn't permanent. Maybe they simply missed having a son. I honestly don't know. I agreed to meet them. Dinner was awkward. Nobody knew where to begin. Eventually, Mom started crying. "I'm so sorry." Dad looked down at his plate. "I failed you." I believed they regretted it. I truly did. But regret doesn't erase memories. I forgave them. Not because they deserved it. Because I deserved peace. Forgiveness doesn't always rebuild trust. Sometimes, it simply allows your heart to stop carrying the weight. Things between us slowly improved. Not overnight. Some cracks never disappear completely. But they became honest, more grateful, more human. Every Christmas since then, I volunteer. Not because I have to. Because someone once knocked on the window of a lonely man's old Honda, when the entire world seemed to have forgotten him. Margaret still volunteers too. She's in her 80s now. She walks a little slower, carries lighter bags. But somehow, she still notices the people everyone else overlooks. Every Christmas Eve, before we leave with the meals, she smiles at me and asks the same question. Ready? And every year I answer exactly the same way. Let's go find someone who thinks they've been forgotten. Because I know the truth now. Kindness doesn't always arrive wrapped in expensive paper. Sometimes it arrives wearing a red winter coat, carrying 2 insulated food bags, and knocking gently on the window of an old car. That single knock didn't just change my Christmas. It changed the direction of my entire life. Money helped me survive. Work helped me rebuild. But compassion reminded me who I wanted to become. I still remember sitting outside my parents' house, with only $4 in my pocket. I remember believing I had absolutely nothing left. I was wrong. Hope was already walking toward my car through the falling snow. It just happened to be wearing a green scarf. Thanks for reading. Sometimes the greatest Christmas gift isn't found under a tree. It's the kindness of a stranger when you've lost all hope.